Hi, I'm John Messer, the Regional Executive for the Great Lakes Regional Synod and the Leadership Development Catalyst for Luminex. This is the third in a series on systems thinking for church leaders. And today I'm going to help us look at the question of how do we know what's really happening in our church system? And the answer is, well, we look at the variables. We look at what we're experiencing. We look at the variables and see what the relationships between those variables are. And this is a really important tool that we can use. It's called a behavior over time graph. And you can use this in any situation to try to help you clarify your thinking about what's going on in the church. So I'm going to take you through this tool, but I want you to understand that this is a biblical concept. And as a matter of fact, if you're wondering where this comes from, I'd like you to go to Exodus 18, verses 13 to 27. This is the interaction of Jethro and Moses. When Jethro observes what Moses is doing in his ministry with the people of Israel, and he says, what you're doing is not good. Jethro understood that the system was producing outcomes that were not what Moses intended. And so we're going to go through the variables that we find in that account, and we're going to use those as the example for our behavior over time graph. So when we look at that passage, which I don't have time to go through completely, but I'm going to trust that you'll take a look at this, we see three primary variables that Jethro observes. Number one, there's a dissatisfaction of the people of Israel when they're having to wait for Moses to adjudicate their cases. Moses is judging the people, in other words, declaring God's truth and adjudicating cases based on God's word and on God's values and his principles and his priorities. And the people are having to wait longer and longer as Moses does this more and more. And Moses is the only person doing it. And so, as more people come, not only does the dissatisfaction rise, these are the variables, and here is the time. The longer it goes, the more the dissatisfaction increases. But also, Moses' ministry time increases, almost proportionally, I would say. Now, the important thing to know about a behavior over time graph is that this is not a quantitative graph, this is a qualitative graph. So we don't have numbers to plug into this, but a qualitative graph is just as valuable in this case because we see that over time, we're recognizing that the dissatisfaction is increasing. We also can see from Moses and Jethro's account in Exodus 18 that Moses' ministry time was increasing. And not only that, Jethro recognized when he talked to Moses that Moses' anxiety and his stress level was increasing proportionally as well. So as the dissatisfaction increases, the ministry time increases, and the anxiety and stress increases. And now this is a really important point that I want to highlight for you ministry leaders. We know that ministry burnout is an epidemic in the church. And I'm going to tell you that what you're looking at right here is the model of how that happens. When Jethro is challenging Moses and asking him what he's doing and then saying what you're doing is not good, what he's doing is warning Moses about the potential for ministry burnout. This is how it happens. Dissatisfaction increases, we put in more time, we do more ministry, we work more hours. And then the anxiety goes up, the stress level goes up, the family time goes down, which we're not talking about here, but that's the model. This is the behavior over time graph for ministry burnout. That's why this is really important. This is not just hypothetical, this is real world stuff. So, what do we do with this? Well, we have found that there are positive correlations. As this goes up, that goes up. And as that goes up, this goes up. Those are positive correlations, positive relationships between the variables. And the number one thing we need to know if we're going to find out what's really happening in our church is to find the relationships between the variables. Now, it could be that we would have variables that would go down as one goes up. That's a negative or an inverse relationship. But in this case, all three variables increase seemingly in a proportional way. And so finding that positive or negative relationship between the variables is step number one. The basis of these variables form the basis of a fuller system diagram called a causal loop diagram, which we'll look at later. But these these variables and finding the relationships, positive and negative, between them are the basis of finding that fuller system diagram. And so what we are doing here is simply identifying what are the core variables that we need to pay attention to in our system, because if we're going to find where the real problem lies, we need to be able to distinguish between the symptoms of a problem and the problem itself. For example, the anxiety or the stress is a symptom. It's not the core problem. Is the ministry time the core problem, or is that another symptom of the problem? Is dissatisfaction a symptom of the problem or the core problem? Well, we won't know that for sure until we're able to look more fully at this, but this gives us a place to start, and it kind of delineates the boundaries of what we're going to look at. So to answer the question of what's really happening, we start here. We list the key variables over time and look for positive or negative relationships between them. And then we take it to the next step, which is looking at them from another perspective of another tool called a causal loop diagram. And that helps us then to narrow into where the real problem lies and where we can intervene to change it. So we'll get to that next time, but look for a handout available on the website that will give you more information about the behavior over time graph and how we work with variables and distinguish between symptoms and core problems. So I will see you next time when we talk about step 4 in systems thinking. Thank you.